The meeting room aboard the Aurora buzzed with the usual mix of alien, languages and translators working overtime. Dr. Jake Morrison sat at the long metal table, his coffee growing cold as he listened to the weekly briefing about potential colony worlds. The ship's captain, a tall woman named Carol Hayes, pointed to the holographic display showing a water-rich planet called Marsh 7. The surface is mostly wetlands, Carol explained, her finger tracing the blue-green areas on the spinning globe. High oxygen content, plenty of fresh water, and rich soil perfect for agriculture. The reptilian Zephyrian scientist, Crixtal, leaned forward, his scaled head tilting with interest. This world appears ideal for settlement. The wetlands would provide excellent hunting grounds and spawning areas for our people. Jake watched as the other alien crew members nodded in agreement. The insectoid Vrex researcher, Shitmore, clicked his mandibles excitedly. On my homeworld, the great swamps are where our greatest cities stand. The water provides transportation, food, and protection from predators. Same with us, added the amphibian Quellan engineer Blub Knox, his voice bubbling through the water-filled speaker system. Swamps are the safest places in the galaxy. Rich nutrients, stable temperatures, and gentle currents. Carol looked around the table. Any objections to marking this world as a priority colony site? Jake cleared his throat. Actually, I have some concerns about the wetland designation. The room fell quiet. Crixtal's yellow eyes fixed on Jake with curiosity. What concerns could you possibly have about such a perfect habitat? Jake shifted in his seat, suddenly aware that all eyes were on him. Well, humans typically avoid establishing permanent settlements in swamp regions. We prefer higher ground, drier areas. But why? Chitmore's antennae twitched with confusion. Your species comes from a water-rich world. Surely you understand the benefits of wetland environments. Jake glanced at his human colleague, Dr. Lisa Carter, who sat across the table. She gave him a look that said she knew exactly what he was thinking about. They had both grown up on Earth. Both understood why humans stayed away from swamps whenever possible. It's complicated, Jake said carefully. Earth's swamps are different from what you might expect. Blub Knox bubbled with laughter. Different how? Water is water. Mud is mud. Swamps are the most peaceful environments in the universe. The other aliens murmured their agreement. Jake realized he was going to have to explain something that would sound impossible to beings who had never experienced Earth's unique brand of wetland terror. On Earth, Jake began slowly, swamps are not peaceful places. They're actually some of the most dangerous environments on our planet. Crixtal's head tilted further. Dangerous how? Are you referring to unstable ground conditions, or perhaps bacterial contamination? No, Jake said, shaking his head. I'm talking about the creatures that live there. The aliens exchanged glances. Chitmore clicked his mandibles in what Jake recognized as amusement. Surely you're not suggesting that simple wetland fauna pose a threat to an advanced species like humans? Lisa leaned forward. Jake, maybe you should tell them about the Amazon. Jake took a deep breath. He could see the skepticism in their alien faces, the way they looked at him like he was making excuses for some irrational human fear. They had no idea what they were asking about. The Amazon basin, Jake said, is the largest wetland system on Earth. It covers over 2 million square miles of swamp, rivers, and flooded forests. Sounds magnificent, Blub Knox gurgled. Perfect for a thriving civilization. There are no permanent cities in the Amazon, Jake replied. The few humans who live there stay in small groups, constantly moving, never settling in one place for long. Crixtal's eyes narrowed. Why? Jake looked around the room at all the curious alien faces. They genuinely didn't understand. On their worlds, swamps were safe havens, places where families raised their young and elders lived in peace. They had never encountered anything like what lived in Earth's wetlands. Because, Jake said quietly, Earth's swamps are full of creatures that can kill adult humans with their bare hands. The room erupted in what Jake could only describe as alien laughter. Chickmore's clicking became rapid and high-pitched. Crick's dolls' throat vibrated in a low rumble. Even Blubnox's bubbling took on a distinctly amused tone. "Forgive us," Crickstall said, wiping moisture from his eyes. "But you must understand how that sounds to us. Humans are apex predators. Your species conquered an entire planet. What could possibly threaten you in a simple swamp?" Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had expected this reaction, but it still irritated him. These aliens had never faced down a 20-foot anaconda or stared into the eyes of a prehistoric crocodile. They had no idea what they were talking about. "I was part of a research expedition in the Amazon 5 years ago," Jake said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I watched a green anaconda try to crush one of my colleagues to death." The laughter died down, but Jake could still see the skepticism in their faces. They thought he was exaggerating, maybe even lying. The snake was over 20 feet long. Jake continued. It weighed more than 200 pounds of pure muscle. When it wrapped around Dr. Amy Peterson, I thought we were going to watch her die. Chitmore's antennae stopped twitching. "What did you do?" Jake met his gaze steadily. Our survival expert fought it with his bare hands. The silence that followed was different from before. The aliens weren't laughing anymore. They were starting to realize that Jake wasn't making this up. "You're serious," Crickstall said slowly. "Deadly serious," Jake replied. "And that's just one story. I have dozens more." Carol cleared her throat. "Maybe we should hear these stories before we make any decisions about colony sites." Jake nodded. He could see the curiosity in their faces, now mixed with the first hints of concern. They were beginning to understand that there might be more to human behavior than they had assumed. "If you really want to know why humans avoid swamps," Jake said, "then I'll tell you. But I warn you, you're not going to like what you hear." Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind traveling back to that humid morning in the Amazon basin 5 years ago. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Every detail burned into his brain by the raw terror of what he had witnessed. "I was 26 years old," Jake began, his voice quiet but steady. "Fresh out of graduate school, eager to make my mark in xenobiology. The expedition was supposed to be routine, just cataloging plant species for potential medical applications. The aliens around the table leaned forward, their earlier amusement replaced by genuine curiosity. Jake could see that they were finally taking him seriously. The team leader was Captain Roy Henderson, a 50-year-old veteran who had spent most of his life in dangerous environments. He handpicked the crew: Dr. Amy Peterson, a marine biologist who specialized in aquatic ecosystems, and Nick Rogers, our survival expert and guide. Jake paused, remembering how confident they had all felt the first day. They had the best equipment, years of training, and complete faith in their abilities. None of them had truly understood what they were walking into. "The Amazon isn't like other swamps," Jake continued. "The water is dark, almost black, and you can't see more than a few inches below the surface. The trees grow so thick that sunlight barely reaches the ground. Everything is wet, everything is rotting, and everything is alive." Chitmore clicked, his mandibles nervously. "That doesn't sound particularly dangerous." "That's what we thought," Jake replied. "We had been working for 3 days without any serious problems. Amy was collecting water samples from a small lagoon about 50 yards from our camp. The water was calm, maybe 4 feet deep, surrounded by thick vegetation." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, seeing Amy's face in his memory. She had been so excited about her research, so focused on her work, that she hadn't noticed the danger until it was too late. Amy was kneeling at the water's edge, filling sample bottles when the anaconda struck. These snakes are ambush predators. They hide underwater, perfectly still, waiting for prey to come to them. Amy never saw it coming. The room was completely silent now. Jake could feel the tension building as the aliens began to understand that this wasn't just another research accident. The snake exploded out of the water like a missile, Jake said, his voice growing more intense. In less than 2 seconds, it had wrapped itself around Amy's waist and was pulling her toward the deeper water. She screamed once, then couldn't breathe anymore. Crickstal's scaled hands gripped the edge of the table. "What did you do?" "I froze," Jake admitted. "I stood there like an idiot, watching this massive snake trying to kill my friend." The anaconda was as thick as my torso, covered in wet scales that looked like armor. Its head was the size of my fist, and its eyes were cold and completely emotionless. Jake remembered the helpless feeling that had washed over him in that moment. All his training, all his knowledge, had been useless against something so primitive and powerful. "Nick Rogers saved her life," Jake continued. "He was 20 feet away when the attack happened, but he didn't hesitate. He ran straight toward the snake, yelling at the top of his lungs. He attacked it?" Blub Knox bubbled in disbelief. "He jumped on it," Jake said simply. "This man, who weighed maybe 180 pounds, launched himself at a snake that outweighed him by 50 pounds and was designed by evolution to crush large prey to death." Jake could still see Nick's face in his mind, set with grim determination as he wrapped his arms around the anaconda's thick body. The man had known exactly how dangerous the situation was, but he hadn't cared. The snake was trying to drag Amy into deeper water while simultaneously tightening its coils around her chest, Jake explained. Every time she breathed out, the anaconda squeezed tighter. She was turning blue. Her eyes were starting to roll back. "How did he fight it?" Chitmore asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "With his bare hands," Jake replied. Nick grabbed the snake's head with one hand and started unwrapping its coils with the other. But anacondas are incredibly strong. Every muscle in that 20-foot body was designed for one thing: crushing prey to death. Jake remembered the sound of the struggle, the splashing water, Nick's grunts of effort, and Amy's desperate gasps whenever the snake loosened its grip for even a moment. The snake tried to bite Nick, but he kept his thumb pressed against the back of its head, controlling the angle of its strike. With his other hand, he was slowly, systematically unwrapping each coil. It took him almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Crickstal's voice was filled with disbelief. 10 minutes of pure physical combat, Jake confirmed. Nick was fighting for leverage, using his body weight and positioning to gradually force the snake to release its grip. The anaconda was fighting back, trying to transfer its coils from Amy to Nick, trying to get a better angle for its bite. Jake could see the confusion in the aliens' faces. They were trying to understand how a human could physically overpower a creature that was specifically designed to kill large prey. Nick won because he was smarter, Jake explained. He understood that the snake's strength came from its ability to maintain pressure. Every time the anaconda shifted its coils, Nick was there, preventing it from getting a solid grip. He used the snake's own momentum against it. But how did he have the strength? Blubnox asked. Jake smiled grimly. Humans are stronger than we look. When someone you care about is dying, you find reserves of strength you didn't know you had. Nick was running on pure adrenaline and determination. What happened to the snake? Chitmore asked. Nick didn't kill it, Jake replied. Once he got Amy free, he backed away slowly, keeping himself between her and the anaconda. The snake retreated into the water, probably wondering what kind of crazy prey fights back like that. Jake looked around the table at the stunned alien faces. They were beginning to understand that Earth's swamps weren't just inconvenient or uncomfortable. They were actively hostile environments where death could strike without warning. Amy had 3 broken ribs and couldn't breathe properly for weeks, Jake continued. Nick's arms were covered in cuts and bruises from the snake's scales. And that was just one encounter in one small lagoon on one day. How many of these creatures live in your swamps? Crickstall asked quietly. Jake's smile was humorless. That's just the beginning. Anacondas are only one of the things that can kill you in Earth's wetlands. There are dozens of other predators, each one perfectly adapted to hunt in those dark waters. The aliens exchanged nervous glances. Jake could see that they were starting to reconsider their enthusiasm for swamp colonies. Would you like to hear about the crocodiles? Jake asked. The silence in the meeting room stretched for several long moments before Crickstall finally spoke. You mentioned crocodiles, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Are they similar to the anaconda? Jake shook his head slowly. Crocodiles are worse, much worse. They're living dinosaurs, unchanged for millions of years, because they're already perfect killing machines. He could see the skepticism creeping back into some of the alien faces. Chitmore's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. Surely you're exaggerating. How dangerous can a simple reptile be? After the Amazon expedition, Jake continued, ignoring the comment, I thought I understood swamp dangers. I was wrong. 6 months later, I was part of a research team studying the Florida Everglades. That's when I met Pete Collins. Jake's expression grew more serious as he remembered the weathered man who had served as their guide. Pete had been in his 50s, with skin like leather and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Pete had been working in the Everglades for 30 years, Jake explained. He knew every inch of those swamps, every animal that lived there, every danger that could kill you. He tried to warn us, but we were scientists. We thought we knew better. Lisa Carter, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. I remember Pete. He had this saying, the swamp doesn't care about your degree. Jake nodded. Pete told us that American crocodiles were the apex predators of the Everglades. He said they could grow up to 15 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds. We thought he was trying to scare us. Were you afraid? Bloodnox asked, his voice bubbling with curiosity. We should have been, Jake replied. The team included myself, Lisa, and a young researcher named Danny Walsh. Danny was fresh out of college, eager to prove himself. He thought Pete's warnings were just old-fashioned superstition. Jake remembered Danny's cocky smile, the way he had rolled his eyes whenever Pete talked about respecting the swamp's dangers. The young man had been brilliant in the classroom, but completely unprepared for the reality of the Everglades. We were collecting plant samples from a narrow channel about 3 miles into the swamp, Jake continued. The water was murky brown, maybe 6 feet deep, with thick vegetation on both sides. Pete kept telling us to stay away from the water's edge, but Danny thought he was being overcautious. The aliens leaned forward, sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Jake could see the tension in their faces, the way they braced themselves for another story of human stupidity meeting natural selection. Danny saw some interesting fungal growth on a fallen log that was partially submerged, Jake explained. He ignored Pete's warnings and waded into the water to get a closer look. The water came up to his knees, and he was only about 10 feet from the bank. Jake paused, remembering the exact moment when everything went wrong. The image was burned into his memory. Danny reaching toward the log, the water exploding upward, the massive jaws closing around the young man's leg. The crocodile came out of the water like a missile, Jake said, his voice growing tense. It was at least 14 feet long, probably weighed close to 800 pounds. Its jaws clamped down on Danny's leg with a sound like breaking wood. Chickmore's clicking stopped abruptly. What happened? Danny screamed. Jake replied simply. The crocodile started doing what's called a death roll, spinning in the water to disorient its prey and break bones. Danny was being dragged under, his head going below the surface with each spin. Jake could still hear Danny's terrified screams, the way they were cut off each time the crocodile pulled him underwater. The young man had been completely helpless, trapped in the jaws of a creature that had been perfecting its killing technique for millions of years. Pete didn't hesitate, Jake continued. He pulled out his knife and jumped into the water. This 50-year-old man voluntarily entered the territory of a massive predator to save someone who had ignored his warnings. He fought the crocodile? Crickstal asked, his voice filled with disbelief. He fought it with a 6-inch blade, Jake confirmed. Pete grabbed the crocodile's head from behind, trying to control its movements. The animal was thrashing wildly, its tail whipping through the water like a club. One hit from that tail could have broken Pete's spine. Jake remembered the chaos of that moment, the way the water had turned red with blood, the desperate struggle between man and predator. Pete had been calm, focused, doing exactly what needed to be done. Crocodiles have the strongest bite force of any animal on Earth, Jake explained. Over 3,000 pounds per square inch. Once those jaws close, normal prey never escapes. But Pete knew their weakness. What weakness? Blubnox gurgled. The muscles that open their jaws are relatively weak, Jake replied. Pete used his knife to stab the crocodile in the soft tissue behind its head, then used his other hand to force its mouth open. It took incredible strength and perfect timing. Jake could see the aliens struggling to understand how a human could physically overpower such a formidable predator. In their experience, prey animals ran from predators or used technology to defend themselves. They didn't engage in direct physical combat. The crocodile released Danny and turned its attention to Pete, Jake continued. Now Pete was the target. With 800 pounds of angry predator trying to kill him, the crocodile's jaws snapped shut inches from Pete's face. How did he survive? Chitmore asked. Experience and courage, Jake replied. Pete had fought crocodiles before. He knew their attack patterns, their limitations. He kept moving, staying behind the animal's head where it couldn't reach him with its jaws. Jake remembered the brutal efficiency of Pete's movements, the way he had used his knife with surgical precision to wound the crocodile without killing it. The man had been trying to drive the predator away, not destroy it. Pete managed to inflict enough wounds to convince the crocodile to retreat, Jake explained. The animal disappeared back into the murky water, probably to find easier prey. Pete dragged Danny to shore, applied first aid, and called for emergency evacuation. Was Danny badly injured? Lisa asked. The crocodile's teeth had punctured his leg in 16 places, Jake replied. His bones were cracked, and he needed months of physical therapy. But he lived because Pete Collins was willing to fight a dinosaur. With a knife. Jake looked around the table at the stunned alien faces. They were beginning to understand that Earth's swamps weren't just home to dangerous animals. They were ecosystems where death lurked beneath every calm surface. This is why humans avoid swamps, Jake said quietly. Not because we're afraid, but because we respect the creatures that live there. We understand that these environments can kill us, and we act accordingly. Crickstal's voice was barely above a whisper. Are all Earth swamps like this? Jake's smile was grim. That's just the beginning. I haven't even told you about the snakes yet. Jake could see the growing unease in the aliens' faces as they processed what he had told them. The reptilian Crickstal was unconsciously running his scaled hands along his throat, while Chitmore's antennae twitched nervously. Even Blubnox had stopped his usual cheerful bubbling. The snakes, Jake continued, are probably the most dangerous part of any swamp ecosystem. Not because they're the biggest or strongest, but because they're invisible until it's too late. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a more serious tone. 2 years after the crocodile incident, I was working with Dr. Kevin Brooks on a water quality assessment in the Louisiana Bayou. Kevin was a careful man, methodical in everything he did. He had survived 3 tours in Earth's most dangerous research zones. Jake remembered Kevin's quiet confidence, the way he approached every situation with careful preparation and respect for the environment. The man had been the opposite of young Danny Walsh, someone who truly understood the dangers they faced. We were collecting water samples from a slow-moving creek about 50 miles into the bayou, Jake explained. The water was about 3 feet deep, crystal clear, surrounded by cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful. What made it dangerous? Crickstal asked. Cottonmouth snakes, Jake replied simply. Also called water moccasins. They're semi-aquatic vipers that hunt in shallow water. Their venom can kill an adult human in 6 hours. Jake could see the confusion in the aliens' faces. They were still thinking in terms of large predators, creatures that attacked with overwhelming force. They didn't understand the subtle terror of something that could kill you with a single bite. Kevin was kneeling at the water's edge, filling sample bottles, Jake continued. He was wearing full protective gear, following every safety protocol. But cottonmouths are ambush predators. They lie motionless in the water, looking exactly like floating sticks or debris. Jake paused, remembering the exact moment when their routine day had turned into a medical emergency. Kevin had been so careful, so professional, and it hadn't mattered. The snake struck from less than 2 feet away, Jake said. Kevin never saw it coming. One moment he was filling a bottle. The next moment he was staring at 2 puncture wounds in his wrist and a 4-foot snake swimming away into the creek. What did the venom do to him? Chitmore asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cottonmouth venom is hemotoxic, Jake explained. It destroys blood cells and tissue. Within minutes, Kevin's hand started swelling. Within an hour, the swelling had spread to his entire arm. Jake remembered the growing panic in Kevin's eyes as he realized what was happening to his body. The man had remained calm, following emergency protocols, but they both knew he was in a race against time. We were 50 miles from the nearest medical facility, Jake continued. Kevin had maybe 6 hours before the venom would kill him. We had to get him out of the swamp and to a hospital that stocked antivenom. How did you manage that? Lubnox asked. We called for emergency evacuation, Jake replied. But the helicopter couldn't land in the thick swamp. They had to lower a rescue basket through the canopy while Kevin's condition got worse by the minute. Jake could still see Kevin's face during that helicopter ride, pale and sweating as the venom worked its way through his system. The man had been fighting for his life against an enemy he couldn't see or fight. Kevin survived, Jake said, but he was in intensive care for 3 days. The doctor said another hour would have been too late. One bite from a snake most people would never even notice nearly killed a man who had spent his entire career in dangerous environments. The aliens exchanged nervous glances. Jake could see that they were starting to understand the true nature of Earth's swamps. It wasn't just about big predators you could see coming. It was about 1,000 different ways to die, most of them invisible until it was too late. That's just one type of venomous snake, Jake continued. Earth swamps are home to coral snakes, whose venom attacks the nervous system, copperheads, whose bites cause tissue necrosis, water snakes that look harmless but carry diseases that can kill you weeks later. How do humans survive in such environments? Crickstal asked. Jake smiled grimly. Most of us don't try, but there are exceptions. I once worked with a woman named Maria Santos, a wildlife photographer who had spent 15 years documenting swamp ecosystems. Jake's expression softened as he remembered Maria, a small woman in her 40s, who had possessed an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. She had moved through the swamps like a ghost, seeing dangers that would have killed most people instantly. Maria could identify every snake species by the sound of their movement through water, Jake explained. She could tell the difference between a floating log and a sleeping alligator from 100 yards away. She had been bitten by venomous snakes 4 times and lived to tell about it. How was that possible? Chitmore asked. Training, experience, and respect for the environment, Jake replied. Maria never took unnecessary risks. She carried antivenom for every snake species in her area. She knew exactly how each predator hunted, what triggered their attacks, how to avoid their territories. Jake remembered watching Maria work, the way she seemed to communicate with the swamp itself. She had understood that she was a guest in an environment that could kill her at any moment. But even Maria made mistakes, Jake continued. I was with her when she accidentally stepped on a pygmy rattlesnake. The bite was on her ankle, and we were 20 miles from the nearest road. What happened? Lug Knox asked. Maria calmly identified the snake species, estimated the amount of venom injected, and administered the appropriate antivenom, Jake replied. Then she walked 20 miles through the swamp while fighting off the effects of rattlesnake venom. Jake could see the disbelief in the aliens' faces. They were trying to understand how a human could function normally while being poisoned by a creature specifically designed to kill large prey. The antivenom made her violently sick, Jake explained. She was vomiting, running a fever, and her vision was blurred. But she kept moving because she knew that stopping meant dying. She survived? Crickstal asked. She survived, Jake confirmed. But that incident convinced her to retire from swamp photography. Maria Santos, who had spent 15 years in the Usta, most dangerous wetlands on Earth, finally decided that the risks were too great. Jake looked around the table at the stunned alien faces. They were beginning to understand that Earth's swamps weren't just inconvenient or uncomfortable. They were complex ecosystems where death could strike from any direction at any time. This is what humans understand about swamps, Jake said quietly. They're not just bodies of water with some dangerous animals. They're entire ecosystems designed to kill anything that doesn't belong there. How many species of dangerous creatures live in these swamps? Chitmore asked. Jake's smile was humorless. Hundreds, and I haven't even mentioned the insects yet. The meeting room had fallen completely silent. Jake could see the impact his stories had made on the alien crew members. Their earlier enthusiasm for swamp colonies had been replaced by a growing understanding of why humans approached wetlands with such caution. The insects, Jake continued, might be the most dangerous part of any swamp ecosystem. Not individually, but in the diseases they carry and the sheer number of them. He looked around the table, seeing the nervous expressions on the alien faces. They were finally beginning to grasp the true complexity of Earth's swamp dangers. Mosquitoes alone kill more humans than all the large predators combined, Jake explained. They carry malaria, yellow fever, dengue fever, and dozens of other diseases. In some swamps, a single mosquito bite can be a death sentence. Chitmore's antennae drooped. Your swamps sound like death traps. They are, Jake replied simply. But that's exactly why they made humans what we are today. Every danger I've described has shaped our species, made us stronger, more adaptable, more resilient. Jake stood up and walked to the holographic display of Marsh 7, the water-rich world they had been discussing. The planet looked so peaceful from space, its blue-green surface unmarked by the struggles that had defined human evolution. Let me tell you about Alex Turner, Jake said, his voice taking on a different tone. He's a search and rescue specialist who works in the Florida Everglades. His job is to find and save people who get lost in the swamps. Jake remembered meeting Alex 3 years ago, a quiet man in his 30s who possessed an almost supernatural ability to navigate through the most dangerous wetlands on Earth. Alex had been doing his job for over a decade, venturing into places that most humans would never dare to go. Alex doesn't just survive in swamps, Jake continued. He thrives in them. He's rescued over 200 people from environments that would kill most trained soldiers. He moves through the swamps like he was born there. How is that possible? Crickstall asked. Because humans don't just avoid dangerous environments, Jake replied. We study them, understand them, and eventually master them. Alex has turned the swamp's dangers into tools for survival. Jake could see the confusion in the aliens' faces. They were trying to understand how a species could transform its greatest threats into advantages. Alex uses alligator trails as highways through the swamp, Jake explained. He reads snake behavior to predict weather patterns. He identifies safe water sources by watching bird migration. He's turned a death trap into a familiar neighborhood. Jake remembered watching Alex work, the way he seemed to communicate with the swamp itself. The man had understood that survival meant becoming part of the ecosystem, not fighting against it. But Alex isn't unique, Jake continued. He's part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years. Human military forces train in swamps specifically because they're so dangerous. Navy SEALs, special forces, and elite units from around the world use swamps as training grounds. The aliens exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that there was more to human behavior than simple avoidance of danger. We deliberately seek out the most dangerous environments we can find, Jake explained. We use them to test ourselves, to push our limits, to become stronger. What kills other species makes us better. Jake walked back to his seat, looking at each alien face in turn. They were seeing humans in a new light, understanding that their species had been forged in environments that would destroy most other life forms. The Aurora's next mission, Jake said quietly, is to explore and map the swamp systems of Marsh 7. When Captain Hayes asked for volunteers, every human crew member signed up immediately. The aliens stared at him in shock. Carol Hayes nodded grimly. That's correct. We have a waiting list of humans who want to join the mission. But why? Blub Knox bubbled in confusion. After everything you've told us about swamp dangers, why would humans volunteer for such an assignment? Jake's smile was fierce. Because we're not afraid of swamps. We respect them. We understand that they're dangerous, and that makes us want to prove ourselves against them. He could see the dawning comprehension in the alien faces. They were finally understanding what made humans different from every other species they had encountered. This is what you need to understand about humanity, Jake said, his voice growing stronger. We don't avoid swamps because we're afraid of them. We avoid them in daily life because we have healthy respect for environments that can kill us. But when we need to go into those swamps, we do it. Jake thought about all the humans he had known who had chosen to work in dangerous environments. Scientists like himself, soldiers, rescue workers, explorers, people who looked at the most hostile places on Earth and saw challenges to overcome. Every human who works in swamps knows they might die, Jake continued. We accept that risk because we understand that growth comes from facing our fears, not avoiding them. The swamps that nearly killed our ancestors made us into the species we are today. Lisa spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Jake, tell them about the training program. Jake nodded. Human military forces have a saying, train hard, fight easy. We deliberately put our soldiers in swamps because if they can survive there, they can survive anywhere. He could see the aliens struggling to understand this concept. In their experience, Intelligent species use technology to avoid dangerous environments. They didn't seek them out as training grounds. Young human soldiers are dropped into swamps with minimal equipment and told to survive for weeks, Jake explained. They have to find food, avoid predators, navigate through hostile terrain, and complete their missions while dealing with everything I've described. That sounds like torture. Chitmore clicked nervously. It's preparation, Jake replied. Those soldiers go on to become the most capable warriors in the galaxy. They've faced anacondas, crocodiles, venomous snakes, and disease-carrying insects. After that, enemy soldiers don't seem so scary. Jake could see that the aliens were beginning to grasp the deeper truth about human nature. They were realizing that what they had interpreted as fear was actually a form of respect born from intimate knowledge of danger. The humans who volunteer for the Marsh 7 mission aren't crazy, Jake continued. They're excited. They see a new type of swamp with new dangers to understand and overcome. They want to test themselves against an alien ecosystem. Carl Hayes leaned forward. Our preliminary scans show that Marsh 7 swamps contain predators we've never seen before. Creatures that make Earth's anacondas look small. Jake's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. Really? How big? Some of the thermal signatures suggest. Creatures over 30 feet long, Carol replied. And the water chemistry indicates they might be venomous. The aliens watched in amazement as Jake's expression changed from concern to anticipation. They were seeing firsthand how humans reacted to information about new dangers. This is why we're the perfect species for this mission, Jake said, turning. Back to the aliens. You see a death trap. We see an opportunity to prove ourselves against new challenges. He walked back to the holographic display, studying the swamp-covered world with new interest. The planet no longer looked like a simple colony site. It looked like the ultimate test of human adaptability. Every swamp on Earth taught us something, Jake said quietly. The Amazon taught us about giant constrictors. The Everglades taught use about armored predators. The Louisiana Bayou taught us about venomous ambush hunters. Jake turned to face the aliens one last time. Marsh 7 will teach us about alien swamp ecosystems. And when we're done, we'll understand those swamps better than any species in the galaxy. The meeting room fell silent as the implications sank. The aliens were finally understanding why humans had become the galaxy's most successful explorers and colonists. They didn't avoid dangerous environments. They conquered them. So when you ask why humans avoid swamps, Jake said, his voice filled with quiet pride, the answer is simple. We don't avoid them. We respect them, we study them, and when necessary, we master them. Krickstahl's voice was filled with something that might have been admiration. Your species is either very brave or very foolish. Jake's smile was fierce. We are human. Sometimes there's no difference. The holographic display continued to rotate, showing the swamp-covered world that awaited them. But now, it didn't look like an obstacle to overcome. It looked like humanity's next great adventure, another dangerous environment that would test their limits and make them stronger. The aliens had asked a simple question about human behavior. Jake had given them a glimpse into the soul of a species that had been forged in the most dangerous environments their world could create. They were beginning to understand that humans didn't just survive in hostile conditions. They thrived there. As the meeting concluded, Jake could see the new respect in the alien faces. They were finally understanding what made humans different from every other species they had encountered. Humans weren't afraid of the dark waters and hidden dangers of the swamps. They were the species that had learned to call those dangerous places home.